13 years ago, I got divorced and transitioned in career from working artist, which is evidenced behind me, all the artwork back there, to becoming a certified life coach. And my specialty has been dating and relationships up until a few years ago when I also added business coaching to my coaching career because the bottom line is I love empowering women to be their best self, whether it's in dating or any other relationship. And the part that I love the best is the self-empowerment. So over COVID, I published my first book, Becoming a Woman of Value: How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this was a huge accomplishment. So I just love talking about how to communicate in a more empowered way, which is what we're going to be talking about today when it comes to boundaries. We're living in unprecedented times. We have, between COVID and Black Lives Matter and the election and all kinds of things that are polarizing us, we need to set boundaries more than ever before. So today I'm going to cover some of the boundary challenges that we're dealing with today and how setting boundaries can help you to stay safe and sane in the face of the insanity going on in the world today. So first I want to define boundaries. We often get this wrong. We think boundaries are a big wall that we put up and we're afraid of setting them because it feels harsh. It feels unkind, just like saying no can feel like they won't like me, I'm abandoning, somebody, when in reality you're abandoning yourself. So let's define what boundaries really are. And this is my definition that all healthy relationships need boundaries to thrive. A good way to think about boundaries is like a velvet rope. And I like to use like a pink velvet rope. It's soft, it's not a big wall. But in theaters, when they have those ropes up and they can unhook them and let people in and keep people out. So those are what boundaries do. They keep people in and out of your life. And it protects what's important to us so that those things that are important to us don't get lost, abandoned, abused by others. So just imagine like an imaginary line protecting what's important to us. Your boundaries tell people how they can treat you, what's acceptable to you and what is not. And without boundaries, people may mistreat you without even realizing it because you haven't set limits about how you expect to be treated. I see this so often where, you get mad at somebody, they should know, especially in the dating world. It's like, if he loved me, he would just know that I want him to buy me flowers every Friday. But you know what? You've never let him know that. So how does he know that? So boundaries protect our energy. We talked a little bit about energy with Christine, that our energy is really one of the most precious commodities. Our energy, our time, our health, our emotional safety, and the sacredness of all of our relationships really depends on boundaries. So what happens when we don't protect what's important to us or tell the truth about how we feel when somebody steps on a boundary is we end up feeling off or depleted or angry or resentful. So when we say no and we draw a boundary, it's not just about protecting ourselves, but it also allows people to get to know who we really are and what's important to us, to stay true to ourselves, which is the same thing with saying no to what's not working. So the practice of setting and upholding our boundaries strengthens our self-worth and it helps our relationships be more drama-free. All that drama that people talk about, it's like people aren't being truthful. They're not setting boundaries. They're not preemptive with their boundaries. So I want to talk about some of the particular boundary issues that we're dealing with today. And these are things that I've heard from my clients and that I've experienced myself. And I would love to see in the chat area any specific issues or challenges that you're dealing with during the pandemic, during any of these crazy things that we're going through, and where you need to set a boundary or you have set a boundary, but something that's going on. So I'm going to mention a few. Let me know if any of these resonate with you. So the first one is people who are not complying with COVID restrictions in the same way you are. We all have different ideas about what that looks like. So I know like two of my kids work in retail, and some of the people will come too close or they're not wearing a mask, and then they'll like curse you out when you tell them that they should put their mask on. My son had a doctor come into the Apple store where he works, and he pulled his mask down to make a phone call. And my son said, "Put your mask back on." He said, "I've had COVID and I'm a doctor, so I know what to do." And he goes, "You can leave the store." It's like if you can't set that boundary with somebody who's in power, somebody who thinks that they know better, you got to really keep your boundary true. And this is not just his boundary, but the store's boundary. So some people are putting people at risk, and that is an issue. Let me know if you've had any issues with people who are not complying with your requirements around social distancing and mask wearing. And then there's people who call and complain about the pandemic, "Oh, this is so hard. I have so much anxiety about this." Or people who call you and complain about how hard it is to work from home. So there's the complainers. Are you setting boundaries around the complainers? So we have a few. I've set a boundary in my home that when I'm in my office, I'm working, I'm not available as a wife and mom unless there's an urgent matter. Scarlett, I love it. I totally support you in that boundary. I think we have to let people know. I have a sign on my door that says recording when I'm recording a podcast. Um, don't disturb. I lock my door, but I've let my kids know, do not disturb. Joyita says on the Metro North, many are non-compliant. Yeah, that's a tough one because it's a public space. And, I guess in that case, you probably get up and move if you can. But also asking somebody nicely, can you please put on your mask? Or telling somebody in charge. Sometimes it's not just about us. I have a friend who calls a lot and tells me how hard it is for her. And it's like in the beginning I got it, but then we're talking 7 months, 8 months down the line, it gets hard to hear. So what do you do? And and then I know people who have a child who has different standards and will yell at the mother, "You're not doing it right." What do you do about that? Then we have all the unsolicited advice, whether it's COVID or otherwise, people who just go, "You know what you should do?" Love that. Anybody experience that unsolicited advice from anybody? I have people in my family who should me a lot. Or people who, say, "You're going to get sick. Here's a list of what you have to order now. You have to get one of those pulsometers and you have to do this and take your temperature every day. You're not exercising right. You're not doing this right. You're not taking enough vitamin C, zinc. You should be." um, so then there's the people who judge you, the people who judge you. You're not doing it right. So between the unsolicited advice and the judgment, and then what Scarlett brought up, people who are not respecting your privacy at home. I have two adult children living with me. Let me know if you have some unusual living situations since COVID started. And one of my daughters, who was living in Brooklyn, came home, and she's 25, and she's like, "I'm an independent person. I don't have to tell you where I'm going, or, really, why should I contribute in this way?" And, I laid down some boundaries, and she didn't like it in the beginning. But my home couldn't function without boundaries. And so getting respect, both for her and for me and for my son, we had to really sit down and create new boundaries. We have, Sarah said, I took a class on communication once and they said, "You should stop shitting all over people." Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, that should. Anytime I hear should and I'm coaching somebody, I'm like, yeah, just pull that one out. What's going on here? And then we have people who want your time, want a favor, want you to do things now when they want it. What are you doing about that? I've also had clients or potential clients who want me to over explain my coaching programs when I've been clear and I've had time with them. There comes a time when there's a boundary. I've had people cancel last minute. There's a boundary. So you've got to know your yeses and nos when it comes to your life so that you know how to set those boundaries. So I did have a handout that everybody should have gotten, right? And I'm going to go through it. It's my 5-step method for setting crystal clear boundaries. And before I go through it, I want you to know that when you are triggered or upset, it's really hard to respond in a way that is even keeled, calm, because we have a flood of emotions. And that could lead to us shutting down or being reactive. And we want to be responsive, not reactive. That's what emotional intelligence is. So we need to process what is going on before we set the boundary and before we speak up. So the first step is to know your core needs. And Christine touched on this a little bit in her talk. We need to figure out what is the most important thing to us. Everything can't be important. So we have to first tune into ourselves. What are the 5 most important values and needs that we have? I like to narrow it down to about 5. So I just did a quick list. Honesty, family, creativity, flow, connection. Those are 5 really important things to me. So let's say honesty. I'm looking at honesty and I'm not being honest with this person because I'm afraid of their reaction. But honesty is one of my core needs. So I know that I have to be honest and kind by setting a boundary. Family is important. So if somebody wants to step on my family time and I have already made a commitment to family, is this going to conflict with that? If it is, then I need to set a boundary around that. Creativity is hugely important to me. So all these things, once you come up with those core needs, look at that list and see, is this conflicting with something really important to me? The second step is to take time to process what's going on for you. So here, back again, all of it starts with you. What we usually do is we look first at the other person. And I was just coaching somebody today, and she said the first thing she thinks of is, I did something wrong, I'm wrong, what's wrong with me? That's old stuff. So when we can be self-focused, we can get clear, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? So sometimes we can't name the emotion. We just there's anger, there's rage, but am I feeling it somewhere in my body? And we tend to not tune in to our body at all because we kind of have dismissed a lot from here down. And so even if you're feeling just a restriction, some kind of tightness in your chest often is what you feel, or maybe your stomach starts to hurt. And so you can tune into your body first and then start to get clear. I'm angry. What's going on behind the anger? And this is, sort of ninja level processing, but with time and practice, you can really get clear, what is that need? What is that feeling? And with every feeling, there's a need that is not being met. So let's take an example of the client who wanted more time from me. I have a need for flow. Let's say this is really getting in the way of flow for me. I have a strict boundary around, how much energy and time I spend with each person, and so this is more time than I'm willing to spend. I need to set a boundary. And this all helps us to clarify what's going on for us, and it lowers our stress levels before we even speak up. The next step is to identify when to set a boundary and when to just let it go, because it's not always appropriate to set a boundary. When are some times when it is good to set a boundary? If it's somebody you're very close to and it's important to the relationship, set a boundary. When not to set a boundary, if it's your trigger and it has nothing to do with the other person, and we don't always know that. Let's say maybe you haven't eaten in 6 hours and you're really pissy and you take it out on somebody else. That's a trigger that has nothing to do with the other person. So that person who's taking out their anger, or it's actually really a lack of food, which has made them very tense, it's not fair to the other person. So the more aware you can be on, okay, so I'm being triggered right now because I haven't eaten or I haven't slept, or somebody else bothered me this morning and now you're pissing me off and had nothing to do with you. Or maybe you have a trigger around there's some kind of shame that you're still carrying from childhood that comes up. That often gets triggered, and fear of abandonment. Somebody just says, you know what, I can't meet with you tonight. And you go, oh my God, they hate me. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's something that you're still carrying. And that's important to work on with a coach or a therapist to figure out why do you keep getting triggered and so sensitive to issues like that. Also, if it's somebody you'll never see or speak to again, setting a boundary is just going to drain you. So I say, like in the dating world, if you're on a first date and you're never going to see this person again, you don't need to go into a whole long explanation about how they pushed against a boundary. Sometimes though, like people will continue to text when you said, I don't want to text anymore. That's a boundary pusher. So you do need to set a boundary and say, listen, I mean no, and then block and delete sometimes, right? Um, and then I will get to your question, Tice, in a minute. The fourth is to express yourself clearly and compassionately. And I say clearly and compassionately because most of us are a little passive aggressive. We're afraid to really speak our mind clearly. We don't always know how. The more we can bring compassion to the conversation, the less triggered the other person's going to get. And we often, so when I'm working with a client, sometimes I'll have them step into the other person's position. I know that a coach did this with me when I was going through a hard time with my daughter after my divorce, and she was really angry at me. And I just didn't know how to get through to her. So my coach had me be her, looking at me and how she might feel. And that really helped me to get a lot more clarity about her position and that she really wasn't doing it to me, but more she was just sad and confused, and I was a safe person to yell at. And so I could be more compassionate when I had more understanding. And so when you can express yourself in this way, it's going to always help the conversation begin with a lot more safety and connection. So we use I statements like, not you did this and blaming statements, which is where we go when we're really triggered. But when this happened, I felt blank. Or just simple little boundary scripts, which I share with my clients when they take my boundaries course. I'm not comfortable with that. Can I tell you what would make me more comfortable? Just letting people know that this is not working for me. Can I tell you what does? Even with the unsolicited advice, and I remember I have an example from when I first started coaching, and my mom was like, "Don't be nervous when you have your workshop. Just don't be nervous." Like she was telling me to suppress an emotion that was it was an okay, acceptable emotion to have during my first workshop. So I said to her, I really appreciate you trying to help. And it's okay for me to be nervous. I actually don't want to suppress my emotions. Can I tell you what would work better? And she said, sure. And my mother used to be extremely defensive. And so I told her, I said, if you could just cheer me on and tell me, I know you got this, that would work a lot better for me. So we're training people to speak to us in the way that we can hear. Sometimes they take it in and sometimes they don't. And finally, we want to let go of controlling the outcome. So that brings me back to what I just ended with, which is sometimes they hear it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll set a boundary, they'll respect your boundary, sometimes they won't. And if you let go of trying to control how the other person's going to respond, you come in with more expansiveness and openness. It's more collaborative. Get curious about the other person's point of view. And now you're having a conversation instead of a demand, because that's not what boundaries are. They're really, this is how I want to be treated, and tell me what's going on for you. Is this something you can do? So that's the 5 steps. And just a few other things before, I just wanted to look at some of the comments. But Taking time and space for yourself helps you to really gain that clarity and focus. We often don't even realize we're out of sorts and we're reactive because we haven't really taken the time to regenerate or, recharge. And that's really, really important. Also, try to limit the amount of news and anxiety inducing stuff in your life. Don't pick up every call, let things go to voicemail. Don't go to email first thing in the morning. You're responding to people before you're taking care of yourself. And limit your connection to people who drive you nuts. It's really, really important. So, just wanted to answer the one question here from Thais. Are your core needs different from your core values? I think they're pretty similar. And what I recommend is that you look at what's really important to you, whether you call it a need or a value. Um, like a need might be for connection or communication. And then really get clear about what that means to you, because not everybody knows what communication means to you. For some people, communication is texting once a week, and for other people, it means I need to talk to you every single day. So when we can have clarity about what we need and what our values are, we can set boundaries in a much better way.